Athina is one of us. Athina is a postdoctoral research fellow in the Center for Global Finance, and he joined us only a couple of months ago. But is already a seasoned researcher, mainly in the areas of finance and banking. Today she comes to talk about an interesting paper that tries to pave a way for dealing with the data paucity and the data lack of data, especially data that is relevant to COVID-19. Data is so important in finance, economics, accounting, especially for research that is empirical. And so secondary data aside, the question that looms is how will organizations, institutions, all of us researchers get hold of primary data if field work for surveys cannot be undertaken during the main field work of fieldwork surveys in the traditional way. What are people doing? What is the current practice? What needs to be done? So this is a brainstorming paper, a brainstorming session in which Athina will be sharing with us her observations and what she has looked into in this area, and then we make comments and then some proposals of going forward. Okay, Athina will speak for after about say 40 minutes to an hour, and then please post all your comments, suggestions, questions, observations in the chat. Also, if you want to speak, you can indicate using that button that says raise your hand, which is like a palm. And then after Athina's presentation, we shall go into the chat room and look into each of the observations and comments you make. And then after that, I shall be calling upon people who have their hands up to ask questions and to get involved in the fellowship of discussion and exchange of ideas. And then we should be able to draw that to a close before the expiry of the session, which will be 3 p.m. UK time. Okay, so welcome once again. Athina, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Victor. Hello everyone, and thank you, Victor, for your introduction. So my name is Athina Petropoulou, and I joined the Center for Global Finance a few months ago as a postdoctoral research fellow. Today I'm gonna talk to you about a work in progress that we have with Victor Murinde and Meng here, which is on online data collection on the impact of COVID-19. Now, this is an idea that we have been exploring for the past few months, and of course, any comments or feedback that you have is more than welcome. Okay, so the COVID-19 pandemic has had large economic consequences worldwide by unleashing sudden changes in household economic behavior, by challenging the long-term survival of many companies, and by testing the overall resilience of the global financial system. The government policy response to the pandemic was unprecedented in terms of scale, scope, and speed. For example, the CARES Act, which was introduced by the US government in response to the pandemic, was a 2.2 trillion economic stimulus package, which is actually the largest economic stimulus package in the US history. So even though the long-term impact, economic impact of the COVID-19 is still unknown, we noticed that researchers are already undertaking a lot of research activities in order to explore the early implications of the pandemic. But what we have noticed to be the most critical challenge that they face is the lack of data and the lack of data that can closely track the economic activities in times of COVID-19. So to give you a route map of my presentation, first I'm gonna talk on the motivation and the objectives of this paper. Then I'm gonna briefly go through the survey methods that researchers have been using in the past. I'm gonna share with you a few examples of online surveys that try to measure the impact of COVID-19 on companies, households, and the government sector. Then I'm gonna talk a little bit on big data and artificial intelligence and the new research avenues that these tools open for researchers in their attempt to collect data. And then I'm gonna present to you a hybrid approach of using multiple data sources that we propose as a way of going forward. Now, as we are already experiencing the wave of the pandemic, there is an imperative need for knowledge creation on the impact of COVID-19. However, the data sets that are available in doing so right now can be limiting. Can be limiting in the sense that a lot of pre-made data sets have that are provided by international organizations like the IMF or the World Bank, they have predetermined variables. Also, macroeconomic data that are widely available, they are often annual or they're provided on an annual or at a quarterly basis. Accounting data are again quarterly at the very best. Stock market data, they come with higher frequencies. However, they are only limited to firms or banks that are listed in the stock exchange. Data on small and medium-sized companies, these kind of companies are often underrepresented in pre-made data sets, and surveys, even though they can be a useful tool to generate data, they are often organized in waves, which means that for a lot of surveys, the data that you get from one wave is not comparable with the data that you get from the next wave of the same survey. So what we are identifying here is that even though there is a great need for knowledge creation and for data to assess the impact of COVID-19, the datasets that are now available fail to do so. For example, in the past, if the government passed an act, we would have data like 6 months or a year before the pass of the act, and then we would wait for 6 months or a year after the pass of this act, and we could assess the impact of this act. However, here with COVID-19, policy decisions are being made with 1 week gap. So 1 week the shops are open and the next week the shops are closed. However, the data that we have right now go that thinly inside this gap. But we still, as researchers, want to evaluate the impact that these measures have. So we do need to evaluate those policies at a very faster pace than the data that now we have available. This lack of higher frequency and more inclusive financial data is underlining the need to employ alternative data collection strategies in order for us to make more informed policies and practices. Under these highly uncertain circumstances, data availability is becoming increasingly important. If we as researchers are about to make any reliable conclusions on the impact of COVID-19, then these have to come from data. So it needs to be empirically supported by good quality data. So our main idea has two components. First of all, we want to evaluate the existing methods that are available in an attempt to collect data on COVID-19. So we want to see what researchers have been doing in the past and what they are doing now in their attempt to collect data. And the second idea is that we want to propose ways through which this data collection process can go forward. So we want to bring to researchers' attention new ways and new routes that they can follow given the current circumstances. This will result in a compilation of data using both existing as well as primary sources. And at the end, we will end up with building a comprehensive data set that will allow for dynamics between the key pillars of the economy. So we have households, companies, and banks in our minds. And we want to create a data set that will have both inclusive and as high frequency as possible data on these key pillars of the economy. To be more precise, on households, we want to collect data on savings, on income, and this can be income that comes from employment or from other sources, for consumption, for loans, and for consumer confidence. When it comes to companies, we want to have data on output, sales, access to loans, supplier credits, working capital, earnings, profit or loss, business optimism, the number of employees, and share prices for the firms that are listed in the stock exchange. And lastly, for banks, we want to have data on equity, deposits, loans, securities, overdrafts, interest rates on loans and on deposits, gross income, new loans contracted, new financial products, and the share prices for the banks that are listed in the stock exchange. Now, let us look back at what we know about data collection methods under normal circumstances. One of the key tools that researchers have been used for quite a long of time are surveys. The design of the survey depends on the research objectives, so different populations, different research questions, and different circumstances will require different modes of survey. We have three main categories of surveys, namely these are the factual surveys, the inferential surveys, and the explanatory surveys. Factual surveys, they collect descriptive data, so the researcher is mainly seeking to find factual information. These are often surveys used by polling institutes when they collect information on people's voting preferences, for example, or they're used by consultancy firms when they want to reveal trends in business activities. Inferential surveys, they examine associations or causal relationships between the variable. And a distinctive characteristic of this survey is that the researcher holds prior assumptions or established hypotheses about the relationships between the selected variables. And lastly, explanatory surveys in this survey, there is no intention of testing relationships between factors, but instead the researcher wants to explore new characters and patterns in relation to research subjects. The tools that are often used for conducting surveys are questionnaires, and questionnaires can be of different formats. For example, we have mail questionnaires, handed out questionnaires, or digital questionnaires. And there are also interviews. And interviews can be categorized based on the extent to which researchers have control over asking questions. In that case, you have structured, semi-structured, and unstructured interviews, and can also be categorized based on how researchers interact with the participants. So you have face-to-face, one-to-one, or group interview. Now, let me give you a few examples of online surveys that have been done in an attempt to collect information on the impact of COVID-19. And I'm going to start with online surveys that focus on companies. So one of them is a survey conducted by the Office for National Statistics. The aim of this survey is to capture businesses' view on the impact of COVID-19 on turnover, workforce, prices, and trade. Participants of this survey are UK businesses of all sizes and from various industrial sectors. This survey is administered in waves, and the questionnaire is regularly updated so that it complies with the changing policies. Another survey is conducted by ACCA. The aim of this survey is to identify the challenges that organizations face. Participants of this survey are businesses of all sizes and sectors. However, the majority of them are in the corporate and financial services sector and are small businesses, so they have fewer than 50 employees. This claims to be a global survey, and the multi-country element of this survey is definitely useful because it allows researchers for regional comparisons. However, here we need to note that the UK and Malaysia, the two countries with the highest response rate, account for 36 of the sample. Another survey is a joint initiative of the International Growth Center and the Innovations for Poverty Action. This survey focuses in developing countries, and it is designed in such a way that it can be used to measure the economic impact on a variety of agents, for example, small as well as large companies, self-employed people, workers, and farmers. This survey is conducted both online and via telephone interviewing. And for this survey, they are teaming up with the World Bank. So this survey has been harmonized with the World Bank's Business Pulse survey so that the results of the two surveys can be comparable. Now, there is a number of surveys that have attempted to examine the effect of COVID by directly asking the corporate decision makers. For example, PwC survey um, targets CFOs globally, and this survey has 4 waves, each time expanding on the country and the company coverage, resulting in 24 countries represented in this survey. Another survey is conducted by the International Trade Center. They launched a worldwide survey in order to assess the economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic on global businesses. and this survey is conducted online via their website. Now, of course, these surveys can provide researchers with valuable information by reaching out to their wide and multinational network of corporate leaders. However, they do not come without limitations and without challenges. So one thing that we already discussed is the fact that most of these surveys are administered in waves, which means that the questions at each wave change in order for the survey to comply with the changing regulation. And also participants change, so you might have companies or CEOs that participated in the first and the second wave of the survey but did not participate in the third wave. This undermines the comparability of the results of different waves of the same survey and makes them less compatible with one another. Another limitation comes from the fact that a lot of these surveys stop pretty early, so some of them stop even before summer. However, the COVID-19 pandemic still unfolds and it's still happening. So it might be useful to have later waves of this survey. Also, a lot of the surveys claim to be global, uh, like for example the survey by ACCA. However, as we saw, two countries, they account for 36% of the respondents of the survey. So is it truly global? That is questionable. And another limitation is that these corporations, they draw their samples from their existing clients, and this can lead to a substantial sample selection bias, particularly in low and middle income countries where only the most prosperous firms are clients of these big audit firms. Now, moving on to surveys that are conducted on household. We have, for example, a survey conducted by the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, which measures consumer expectations for how the economy is likely to be affected by the pandemic and how their behavior has changed in response to it. This is an online survey, and it has focused only on US consumer. Another example is a survey conducted by Understanding Society, which follows 40,000 UK households annually. They have launched a study among its participants that asked them to complete a survey once a month. This is part of their UK household longitudinal study. Basically, the participants, they complete a regular survey and additional questions are being added and adopted as the COVID situation develops. Again, these online surveys can provide us with valuable insights. However, it is likely that the respondent households do not have similar characteristics with the non-respondent, and that the reason for their non-response is associated with the phenomenon that is being tested. So what happened, for example, if the households that didn't respond to the survey were sick and hospitalized with COVID-19? Then in this case, of course, you gain a lot of knowledge from the household that answered the survey, but you're actually missing out on important bits of information. Moving on to the government sector, the University of Oxford launched the Oxford COVID-19 Government Response Tracker in March. This tracker collects information on several different common policy responses that governments have taken to respond to the pandemic, for example, income support or investments into healthcare. This tracker can be used as a tool to compare policy responses among countries. It includes data from over 180 countries, and it collects publicly available information on 17 indicators of government response. For those indicators, some of them relate to containment and closure policies, for example, school closure or restrictions in movements. Other record information on economic policies, for example, income support or foreign aid provisions, whereas others record health system policies, for example, testing for COVID-19 or investments into healthcare. Then these data are aggregated into 4 common indices, which are the overall government response index, the containment and health index, the economic support index, and the original stringency index. The overall government response index basically captures government response over all indicators. The containment and health index records lockdown restrictions, testing policy, contact tracing, and short-term investment in healthcare. The economic support index records measures such as income support or debt relief, and the original stringency index relates to the strictness of lockdown measures. And on the right, you can see a representation of how the mean values for these 4 indexes have evolved globally, starting from the 1st of January and going up until the 8th of October. The indices, they range from 1 to 100 based on the level of government action on this area. We can say that all of them, they surged during March and April, with stringency having the largest increase. They are stable in the months afterwards, and the economic support index drops towards the end of September, beginning of October. Well, this government response tracker can be a valuable tool for researchers to incorporate into their own research project. However, its value is yet to be assessed in the future. Now, as we have seen, current data sets often fail to deliver real-time information and services that we discussed. So under this research environment, perhaps it is worthwhile to investigate some real-time digital data approaches that basically draw on big data and artificial intelligence. These are tools that can be worthwhile for researchers. Think, for example, the Billion Prices project, which basically collects prices from many online retailers worldwide to construct daily price indices. And as such, it has far more coverage than official statistics, like, for example, the CPI, and it comes at a much higher frequency. So in an environment of COVID-19, it can be useful to, let's say, investigate prices or investigate price changes on a daily or a weekly level. But this is something that it's not possible using traditional measures like the CPI. So here comes where something like the Billion Price project could be useful. And also, it can overcome certain situations where the traditional measures might be unreliable, like for example the cases of countries like Argentina or Turkey, where government statistics are criticized as being misreported. In general, artificial intelligence and machine learning have been widely used in the field of finance because typically data in finance come in higher frequencies and of greater availabilities, and these techniques can provide an answer in analyzing big data. However, they of course come with their own challenges. Large data sets with complex structures, they can be difficult to organize, which means that there is a need for a simplifying conceptual framework in order to make any meaningful conclusion from this vast amount of data. And also because ML techniques, they require a large number of observations because the algorithm gets better the more examples that you're providing. It can be a barrier for applications such as macroeconomics, which only have a limited number of observations. Now, what we want to draw researchers' attention to is the possibility of using a hybrid approach to find ways to overcome problems related to data availability. Starting with conventional approaches, like, for example, ready-to-use data published by certain organizations like the IMF or the ONS, or buying packaged data from data vendors like Gallup or WRDS can be a great way to get secondary data, because these data are already collected and they are reported in a standardized format that we are familiar with. They usually have a good range of information, and also these providers are well acknowledged by the research world, so their data is regarded as reliable. However, researchers, when using this kind of secondary data, they do not have the freedom in deciding which variables to include in those datasets. And as a result, this imposes restrictions on doing certain research work. If, for example, the researcher struggles to find the appropriate variable to measure what he wants, then this can then compromise the research question or the validity of his results. And another conventional approach to data collection that we already touched upon is collecting primary data using fieldwork and surveys, where the researchers, they do have more control over what data to collect, but of course this comes with its own challenges like coverage, accessibility, time, and costs. So what we want to propose is this hybrid approach that will use both these traditional methods but also new digital approaches in collecting data. And by new digital approaches, what we have in mind is two methods. So the first one is to obtain structured raw data via APIs. And API refers to Application Programming Interface. It is basically a digital key to open a space where companies store their data. So companies host that data in their servers, and at some point, these data, they become commercially available. In order to read the API data, you need to have a special program, like for example, Tableau. What researchers would do normally is that they go into the data vendor and then they download the data using an Excel or a CSV file and use them in Stata or MATLAB or wherever. But what you can also do is that you can link it directly to the API of some program like eViews or Tableau, and then this program can extract directly the data, and data can be updated as the data vendor updates them. This is an example of structured raw data. Then with unstructured raw data, this means that this data is not otherwise available through, for example, an Excel file or a CSV or whatever, and you need, in this case, to build a web data connector to extract this data. So basically, what we're saying is that by using API, the researchers could open the door to even more data. And this could enable us to obtain live raw data directly from the original data sources. However, since we focus on online data sources, it is difficult with these methods to capture the non-digital information that exists out there. So to sum up, what we want to do is basically to advocate for further data collection. And we want to bring to researchers' attention a lot of possible data avenues that they can follow in order to get access to more data. Because the situations that are created now because of COVID-19 requires more frequent and more inclusive data if we are about to draw any early but yet meaningful conclusions on the impact of COVID-19. Eventually, we want to build a data set that will provide dynamics between the major players in the economy, so household companies, international organizations, governments, banks, as well as non-bank financial institutions. We believe that given that we have this data set, there is a lot of feasible projects that can be done and a lot of readings and research work that researchers can embark on. This can be of interest to a wide range of parties, for example, academic researchers, policymakers, investors, or scientific organizations. Also, project sponsors may find commercial interest in the proposed database that we identify, and international organizations might find it useful to integrate new data collection methods in their operations as a way of moving forward, especially now given the increasing pressure to better monitor the global developments that they are under. This sums up the idea that we have and we have been working on this far.
Thank you very much, Athina, for a very clear, lucid presentation, throwing a lot of light on advocating for online data collection, if anything, to help us go beyond the current limitation of being unable to do field work during the COVID-19 practice. Sharing with us what has been done, also highlighting some of the limitations and the challenges that still remain. Okay, there are quite a number of comments in the chat. So let me go through these observations and comments that have been posted in the chat. And then I will turn around to look at any questions that people want to raise. The first, I think, was an observation to say that some of the examples on data collection are on households, companies, banks, but actually also on governments. But also it could be specific. It could be drawing to financial markets, financial institutions, that's banks and non-bank financial institutions. I think the examples on households, companies, banks, and governments are designed to give a structure of main economic activities. But definitely those are examples, could be extended beyond that. There is an interesting a contribution by Oli, who has posted in the chat room an additional insight into data collection. Something say, is everybody doing okay? Let's ask social media, and that then becomes the basis for data being collected on this. There is also in the chat room a link of the EY Consumer Sentiment Index. So thanks to Mustafa Awais, who posted this, and I think it's a very good example that data being collected to shed light on what is happening during the COVID period. Appreciation is also posted in the chat by Aisha Demir, saying that this amazing survey on database, thanks for this, absolutely useful. There is an observation also posted in the chat room by Mustafa Awais on the Oxford University online survey that Athina has just mentioned, and draw the attention that there are some data issues for specific countries in the survey. For example, give an example, France, many restrictions relaxed for 3 days around the 13th of May 2020. And so this was not present in the Oxford University survey, and then giving a link to these tracker issues. And this is very much, appreciated, because basically we need to say that, first of all, appreciate that, Oxford University survey could do a comprehensive, in my view, what becomes the most comprehensive survey of government intervention and reaction to COVID-19, covering a huge number of countries, and becomes such a huge collection. Having said that, we should not sanctify, we don't have to sanctify the data that was collected during the survey. So because it likely to have some limitations, data limitations are part of data collection and should be acknowledged, even when you are doing, a fieldwork exercise for data collection. It becomes important to put the data collected into a validation process, and that validation, of course, gives the good insight into whether, if you have been doing sampling, randomization, whether the random sample reflects the behavior of the true population. So yes, it's good to have insight into some of the limitations of the data that we have been discussing. There is also in the chat room a question about the geographical focus of the study or this survey paper that Athina just presented. This is not specific to the UK alone or to a set of countries. It is rather to look at what is happening globally and say what is happening in that special area of data collection, what innovations are being done in terms of collecting data online, given the advances in ICT, and also the presence of lockdown, and also to look at some of the challenges. Now, of course, the purpose, part of this conversation could be that researchers may want to focus more domestic. For example, think tanks may want to focus, say, on a specific country like UK or France and look into specific sectors. And this may provide a good starting point to look into, and then redesign, or indeed go ahead and look at some of the instruments that have been used for primary collection, redesign their own instruments and collect the data that they want to collect on the motivation of these observations. Siwe, again, I agree with you absolutely. You point out a good point saying that how does artificial intelligence and big data overcome the challenges of the demographic that gets to the part of research in developing countries or low-income countries, middle-income countries, most research. Yes, in some areas, artificial intelligence and big data may not work. Especially say households, if household behavior is not linked to say any form of online purchases, but in others where fintech is scaling up, and the recent paper actually by Joshua Abo highlights this, where fintech has been then, and mobile money use. The information generated from these huge databases of mobile money use is important. So yes, there are limitations and challenges which should be acknowledged, but also acknowledgement should be done of ways possible, which dimensions would be possible to look into. There is a comment by Aisha Demir. Is there any data on economic activity? And the examples given here by Aisha is that some papers, e.g. say the paper by Damguch Kent and others, use electric, based on electric use of individuals, use of electricity, but as an indicator for economic activity during pandemic period, which is available on a daily basis that could be easily matched over COVID period. That's a very good, thanks Aisha for pointing to this direction. But let me now ask, go into people who want to ask the question straight away, who have put up their hand. Very good. And starting with the Mustaba Awais. Please unmute and ask your question.
Well, thank you very much for giving this opportunity to attend this wonderful seminar. And I think this is an excellent work that you are doing at the moment. So my name is Mustab Sarawes, and I'm working with Dr. Junhong Yang on machine learning and artificial intelligence projects related to fintech. So I had a couple of observations related to this project that you're doing at the moment. So first thing is about updated data set for the COVID project. So Oxford University is, as you mentioned, is doing a lot of work on this maintaining data set, but there is another project that has actually been done by HEC Montreal in Canada, and they have been able to successfully collect data of 193 countries. So probably I think, and this data set is being updated on a regular basis. So, and that is very easy to use. On one click, you can download the CSV file. So let me share a link in the chat as well. So, and good thing about this data set is that all these issues is, if there are any issues, because all this data set is open source data set. So that means everybody is contributing from around the globe in this data set. So it's quite interesting data set. Another thing that I have noticed is in your presentation is when you're collecting data from, different globally, one of the main challenges is probably the language as well. So, for example, Italian COVID-19 database is actually being in a different language than English, and there is no standard language that is being used. So in that case, this data source will be very helpful to you because they have actually used artificial intelligence to interpret that language issues, to address these language issues as well. And then I would like to bring your attention to Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index for US market. This is a very popular index that has actually been used in different financial economics paper as well. And it is regularly maintained and updated on regular basis. And it is only focusing on US consumer market right now. So probably you can get a very comprehensive information by using this data set. And then there is another data set that is managed by Conference Board. So Conference Board actually provides data regarding managers and CFOs and CEOs sentiment. And this would be a very good data set that would be related to the developed countries because they are mostly focusing on UK, Canada, Australia, and the US market rather than developing market. I mean, that's one of the challenges to get data for the developing market. Another interesting thing that you mentioned in your presentation is about using API. And my experience tells me that API use is very interesting. It's good, but sometimes you get so much data that it's very difficult to get an informative, thing from your data set as well. And that's a challenge for the big data. So I would say that you should go for Glassdoor API to get feedback from the labor market. So Glassdoor actually collects data from all over the world, and this is like you can get information, you can get feedback of employees who have been actually furloughed, who have been actually lost their jobs, or who have actually are facing any challenges or issues because they provide direct feedback on their companies on this website. It's a very popular website and has been used in a lot of finance paper. And finally, my last point would be like Twitter and StockTwits would be a very interesting kind of a data set for this project. And I think it can offer you a direct insight to your study that you can cover. And probably that should be also helpful from the developing countries as well, because these, especially Twitter, is very common in quite a lot of developing countries, and you can get the data set from there as well. So my feedback. Thank you very much.
Mustafa, those are high quality, highly valuable comments. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And basically, I agree with those observations. Especially thanks for the update on the Canada data source. And we shall look at it. The coverage is much higher. 193 is quite a good collection. And also on the language is a barrier. I know because in some of my research, for example, when I'm doing research on Islamic banks, especially in the Middle East, as you notice, my co-authors are always the people who can speak the language, because I can't read those balance sheet statements. And so I need somebody, we work together with a team, people doing the reading on the language. There's a way we can find a way of going around the language, dimensions. And also, you mentioned very good the Michigan consumer sentiment, because actually the measurement of business confidence and consumer optimism is very important, especially in terms like COVID-19. And some of these indicators, should start feature very much in the literature, and so much also about the CEO. I had a meeting this morning, 9 to 10, which I call a reading group with the researchers at at SOAS, and we are trying to look at some of the new work that has been coming up, published in Tier 3 and Tier 4 journals. Some of the work on COVID is already getting into special issues here. And one of the interesting aspects was, about national culture, that some of the Hofstede's measures of national culture have been incorporated into these studies, especially one on looking into uncertainty avoidance. So yes, some of the data you are referring to is so much important to bring a new story that actually brings COVID into focus. I don't know what say whether Athina wants to add something, but also maybe Meng. When we tried to explore the API, trying to put it on the API, we worked, with the an external IT who actually did a lot of demonstration on a Tableau. Meng, do you want to add something on the way we were manipulating data sets in a Tableau on API?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation, Athina. We have discovered Tableau as a very useful software for connecting web data, as well as presenting analytical results in very refined graphs. So these are the main benefits of this software. And the use of API basically opens up the possibility of connecting to raw data without waiting for data vendors or organizations to collect data, organize data, and then publish that, because that's very time consuming, because by the time we really want to use the data and to tell a story, and the time is already gone. And especially, in this sort of like a pandemic situation where we really want to keep up with all the changes. And also the benefit of using API is that because of the digitalization in most of the industries, a lot of organizations and companies, they stop publishing ready to take away data. They basically pack all their data in the form of connecting to their APIs. So perhaps in the future, there will be more cases where we have to learn how to use APIs to have access to data rather than waiting for the ready-to-use data.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's really good what you're talking about. Now, with Tableau, it's really good to have some sort of interactive graphics. It's very interesting, it's very good. But the limitation of it is that you have a certain limitation of data set that you can collect. And another limitation is that not all websites allow their APIs to be accessed via Tableau.
Yes, yeah.
That's a challenge. So, for example, if you want to look at social media data, that's not possible through it. If you want to look at Glassdoor API, that's not possible with it. So, what you should do, ideally, my point of view is that you should be using R language packages. I mean, if any one of you write the code, that would be the best way to have some sort of accessibility and get the data set in your own university server database, and then create a real-time dashboard. And it would be very interesting to connect everything within the real time. And when you just open it, you don't need Tableau, but you should be able to see the results. But obviously, I mean, this is kind of a lot of activity. It's just easier said than done. So but it's interesting.
Thank you once again, Mustafa. Athina, is there anything you want to add?
No, I completely agree with you, Victor. What the resources that Mustafa shared with us, they're definitely valuable, and thank you for bringing all this to our attention. And I think it's very important what you said on APIs, the fact that you get access to a lot of information, can be overwhelming sometimes. So you might lose track of what you want to do. So that makes the need for a concrete framework even more profound.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Athina. We have a second question from another question from Oli.
Hello, everybody, and
Hi,
thank
Oli.
you. Hi, and thank you for the presentation, Athina. I'm not sure it's a question or it's a comment or it's some based on my experience. I'm the one person who is attempting to develop a survey right now in order to measure changes in specifically in a global cultural capital of individuals. And what we have encountered is basically that we want to measure the change, but we don't have a baseline. Mm-hmm. So how do you establish a baseline without asking, for example, the same question like a before and after? Because a lot of the people whom we are targeting, they do not have patience to answer long surveys. So we had to try to establish the change without actually measuring a baseline. And that is a methodological challenge, basically. And we are doing, basically, we take what we get and we make, we make judgments about where we're going to put the effort, whether to measure a change or to measure a baseline and maybe a change. And then the question is, okay, if we measure a change, how do we explain it? Do we give an open-ended question to people, or we start having survey items and people just, because we don't really know, we can speculate where the change comes from and why suddenly a certain resource is more or less valuable. But because it's so new, we really decided that we have to open it up and collect, data open-ended, and then we'll have to sit down and analyze it and group it and so forth and so on. And that becomes a very labor-intensive. It's not, we cannot just run a regression on it. So this is kind of coming from just a very recent experience, and we haven't run the survey yet. So I just finished revising the item for the 20th time, maybe. Another issue that my experience from international survey is harmonization of categories. Something that is very basic, but it's, even some basic educational categories. In one country, they call high school this way, in another country, high school is this way. So how do you tailor the surveys on one hand to a specific country or location, and then second stage, you need to harmonize and bring together, pull together all the data and harmonize it. So this is, in and of itself, is a big task at least in my experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Oli, for those very important observations that should be reflected in this discussion. You are absolutely right that researchers, for example, working on randomized controlled trials routinely have three surveys: the baseline survey, the intervention or the midline, and then of course the final survey. And it's the only way you can look at, say, the effect of intervention. Indeed, you would have started with a theory of change that figures this. And recently on a current bid, we've been working flat out on this. People are introducing novelties in setting the theory of change. Because initially it used to be like, one single thing that you have to start with the theory of change, but people are breathing some new lives into it. I think it is a challenge. Although arguably some of the advantages of online surveys would be the high probability of keeping cohorts the same. Because of the ICT would allow that you have interaction with, say, given household, given companies. On the one that we've been looking at, say, for example, companies in the UK, you access them because they have a node on which you access them. They have a number on which you access them. They have an email for certain interest in contact points in which you are accessing. So it is possible that one can undertake an online survey, and then 6 months later, you are following up the same kind of cohorts, the same contact point, which would make that possible. Having said that, many things are changing, and that is, many things, especially the COVID thing, has got its own mutation, changing many behaviors. Okay, but in terms of the survey, it may be possible to have repeated cohorts that you would be observing.
Just to say that longitudinal surveys is a profession. And schools that have take longitudinal dimension seriously, they track down. It's a labor-intensive tracking down a cohort, and they have people who that's what they do. They just track down and keep in touch with them so they can take repeated measures. So having been, having seen it in graduate school where they had this longitudinal survey, they kept it for 20, 30 years. So this was like an army of trackers. So I'm just bringing, this is not something that you would establish, and wake up and just establish it unless you have resources and dedicated people to maintain it, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, say, the World Bank in particular, and some of the development banks will have that challenge right now, because like the World Bank Household Integrated Survey has been done over the years for so many years. So now trying to do it, change it from fieldwork to online is a critical challenge. I think there is a very valid point there. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I don't know whether Athina, we want to add anything on that observation. Oh, that's fine.
I think that. No, Victor, please go ahead.
Okay. I don't see anybody else in the chat. I think that, yeah, okay. There is somebody coming up in the chat. Let me see. Esme Kanyumbu. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Athina, for the good presentation. And I should say that it's really important that, given the current environment, that we crack our heads to see, as researchers, how we can get data and how we can proceed. But the point I want to make is that since there's already a widening gap in terms of data between developed countries and developing countries, and looking at the situation in which most developing countries are right now, I think this gap will be widened further, because we still have surveys which are done manually, whereby a researcher goes door by door, meeting people face to face, asking them different questions. And the way they respond to such questions now also bring out some follow-up questions on their levels of understanding. So I think much as we go on with these solutions, we should also take note that this gap will still be there, and maybe this situation may give us maybe an opportunity to think and rethink on how best now we can cover this other part of the world. Thank you.
Yes, I think you're 100% right, Esme, on what you're pointing out. It's true that COVID-19 is actually accelerating difficulties that were already there before that. So how do you handle this when you try to collect data in developing countries, where now you cannot do face-to-face interviews or hand out questionnaires face-to-face. You have to move to online techniques or mobile surveys. And here as well, maybe there is a gender gap in the mobile use in the developing countries, which could result in having much more male representatives in the samples than females, for example. So I think you're definitely right.
Yeah, thanks very much, Esme, for that question. Yeah, I completely agree, and thanks, Athina, for that response. I think that argument actually on the gender gap is a very important observation, which features as an important story and as an important part of the narrative we are trying to get out. Very much appreciated. There is, let me see now, in the chat room, there seems to be a point there, a new point there. Let me track it down. Yeah, okay, Richard. Richard, you want to come in? You have made a very good, important point here. Yeah. I was just going to read the chats, but since you are here, you may as well come in. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was when Ollie was talking about, if I can unmute the camera or not. Okay. At least the microphone's working.
Yeah,
it was when Ollie was saying that difference of search terms are a challenge. When I think Ollie, you gave the example of high school. A high school in one country is called, might be called something else in another. And I said, well, and I felt that's a very good point. And I think we find a similar problem when you compare companies. So, for example, if you take public company, in England we call that a PLC. In France, the equivalent, the French equivalent of a PLC would be an SA. In Germany, it would be an AG. But because of the different corporate laws and regulations, an SA is not exactly the same as a PLC and is not exactly the same as an AG. Then, of course, the term SA will exist in any French or Spanish-speaking country, and so a French SA is not the same as a Colombian one. So yeah, it was a comment rather than a question. Finding a common search term that works in different jurisdictions is going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard and Ori, for that point. I much agree. And you go into the US, you find Inc. For incorporated.
Yeah.
So yes, the challenges remain, and whatever new ideas are put forward, this challenge should be acknowledged because they are challenges, because we are trying, people have tried to find a way around them. Yeah. So well done. Thank you very much.
And the Delaware Inc. is different to a New York one.
Okay, so that's great. Okay, I see a hand raised up no, I think it is Esme. Do you want to come again, or this is another hand?
That's another hand.
Okay, I'll bring it down. Okay. Okay, so I don't see any questions or further comments. I really thank you so much for the interaction, the useful comments that we received, and this will help and go a long way in further work to develop the paper fully and have it circulated as a discussion working paper for the Center for Global Finance. So it will very, very soon, maybe in the course of next week, after incorporating all these wonderful comments, it will be on the website of the Center for Global Finance to actually also be able to pick some other issues. So in terms of the output, this on the output under discussion, the paper under discussion, that's very helpful. And secondly, it could also inform any ideas colleagues may have on the current bid among a number of organizations, especially the UN, World Bank, and some development banks, in terms of the scaling up of the data needs for policy. It's one of the challenges being put forward. And actually, AXA, it came up on the discussion at the AXA forum about 3 weeks ago on releasing the AXA risk report for 2020 on the challenges we have on data and the absence of plausible data, given the limitation that COVID has imposed on field work. Okay, so thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you here again next week, where we have an interesting paper from our colleague Professor Bojo from Sweden. And then the week after, it will be a panel discussion. And on that panel discussion, we will be focusing mainly on developments in the fintech space in view of the COVID-19 pandemic, which will enable us to look at it, either way, look at all the possibilities. And we have a very interesting panel, and I hope you can be able to make it so that you can contribute actively to the discussion. And once again, thank you, everybody.